Hey there everybody, welcome to Tucktuk's Trinkets and Terrain. For this week's video, I decided to challenge myself a little bit and make something out of 100% found materials. So things you could find outside, lying on the ground, sticks, rocks, things like that. So I went outside with the dog, gathered up a bunch of things, and set about checking something off my to-do list, a Hags hut. I don't have anything like this, so it was super fun to make something sort of what I would consider like a classic crafting project. It was a lot of fun and not as much of a challenge as I thought it was going to be. The materials ended up being super awesome to work with. It ends up being a little bit more fragile than I would have liked, but in the long run I think using found materials was a super interesting way to do things. It gave some really interesting textures and shapes, so it was pretty cool. I will say that I did cheat a tiny bit. I needed a base for my project, so while I could have found something outside to use, I didn't, so cheated a little bit. Then obviously I used glue and paint as far as my disclosures go for this project. But thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoy the video.
Alright, so here's the previously mentioned, quote-unquote cheat part of my project base. Just a piece of chipboard that I've cut into a shape and drew a circle on just to get a rough outline of what I am wanting to do. And then first part of the construction, I just grabbed a bunch of these sticks from outside, and you can see I've cut them down all to the same, rough length. I just used a little craft table saw that I have to get some nice flat cuts to make the next part a lot easier. And that is to just hot glue these down into my shape to make the sort of base structure. And after a bunch of gluing, I get this structure with all the logs and sticks making up the outside walls. But to fill in the gaps and create a sort of mortar for all of the branches, I used some dirt that I picked up outside. I think this is actually from a landscaped area that's maybe been overgrown because it's definitely not maintained. But regardless, I mixed that up with a bunch of white glue, some PVA glue, to make this thick, consistent sort of, I'd call it texture paste. And I'm going to lay that down on the entirety of the base, and then also use it to fill in all of the cracks and gaps between all the pieces of wood. Next up is the roof. So same sort of idea. I'm going to glue in some branches that I've snapped to appropriate lengths and just made sort of a teepee structure on top here using some hot glue. And I did this just sort of randomly. I didn't think too hard about this to make it look more, not necessarily ramshackle, but homemade, I guess. And then for the rest of the roof, I wanted to do sort of a shingle idea here with these pine cones. You can see when I break off the individual leaves, I guess. I'm not actually sure what they're called, but we get a nice sort of shingle shape. So I tore off a bunch of those, and then I proceeded to just hot glue these down layer after layer, using the lower ones to glue the top ones on, essentially giving that overlaying look that you would get in sort of standard shingles. And here it is all done. You can see I've got a nice coverage with all the different pine cone pieces, but there are still gaps and spaces that need to be filled out. And once again, I just use my sand and white glue mixture to fill all those in. Once everything was all dry, it was onto the black paint and Mod Podge stage. And while I'm doing that, I just want to remind you to please hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. I post crafting videos every other week if you're interested in checking more videos out. Make sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video so far, and leave a comment if you've maybe tried this before, or maybe there's something unique to your area that you'd be interested in trying out as far as a building material goes. I found some pretty generic things for my build, but if you've got some more unique things, you might be able to build something more interesting. And share this with your friends if you think they'd enjoy it as well. Anything you do for the channel is greatly appreciated. Once the black paint and Mod Podge mixture was dry, I set about laying in my base coat colors. So for the sticks, I started off with this sort of just flat brown, but I wasn't really liking how, thin it was. And that becomes more apparent once I start to lay in the dirt or mortar color. I use this darker brown paint And you can see they're very, very similar in shade. And I just didn't like how same they looked. So I used a bit of this orange paint mixed in with the brown paint to get this sort of richer color to make the branches stand out more against the brown of the dirt. So I finished up painting those base colors down on the sort of main structure. And then for the roof, again, I wanted to differentiate it from the rest of the structure. So I mixed this yellow with the brown paint from before and painted all of the pine cone shingles, and then went back in with that dark brown and all the dirt areas. This is how it looks all dried. You can see the difference in colors here, makes everything stand out, which I really liked. For a quick dry brush, I used the just straight yellow that I used before on the shingles, and then for the branches, I mixed together my orange and tan to dry brush the branches, and then you can see I sort of laid in like a thick sort of line pattern using pretty thick paint. Next up was my wash step. I made this rich brownish red wash for the roof, just trying to, again, to differentiate the colors between the top and the bottom, make them look more different. I just used my normal black wash for the base, and then I decided to do my final dry brush with this light gray all over everything to really age everything down, make it look like it's been here a while. So with the painting done, I wanted to add some greenery, so I used some pine needles that I found outside, and I figured it'd be easier to paint these before gluing them down, so I just used this dark green and a bucket to do a nice coat, and then to add some color variety, I used this lighter green. I didn't cover everything, just add a few different shades. I then cut these pine needles down to some more manageable lengths and got a whole handful. I'm going to glue these down with some hot glue in sort of chunks to make sort of maybe like reeds or long grass, something along those lines. I just glued a bunch of these clumps down all over the front where they would fit. Obviously there's no sort of base behind the hut, so you can see that I've added a bunch of these with different lengths, just sort of randomly all over the front here. So this is just a bunch of dry leaves, like leaf clutter that you would find. I actually got these out of my yard, and I'm going to treat this sort of like I do my parsley that I've used in previous videos. And I crushed this down into a finer mixture. I didn't take out anything that I happened to have picked up, so there's a bunch of different texture, shapes, and whatnot in here. After I crush it all up, you can see it's a lot finer here. Mixed it with a bit of dark green and dark brown paint, as well as some PVA white glue to get a sort of moss leaf litter. I guess you could call it a texture paint that I'm going to spread over every surface as much as I can. I used everything that I had made here. I wanted this to look really overgrown, make it look like it was really out in the wild. And then to add a few highlights, I used my lighter green and dry brushed a few of the areas once it was all dry. Now to add a bit of color, I found these, I really don't know what they are, but you can see there's a bunch of little bulbs on each of these. And they were very, very fragile, so instead of trying to stab at them with a paintbrush, I just spray painted them this solid yellow. And then using a bit of tacky glue, I very carefully tore off individual bulbs and glued those down to make these sort of like flower-like structures. I decided to glue these all over everything to really, the things are just allowed to grow on this without them being cleaned off. But the yellow is kind of hidden in all the greens, so I added just a bit of purple to the very tips of the sort of flower bulbs. And this is the end result. I think this was a really fun challenge. I know a few other people have done this, but I've never tried it before, so it was really fun. I'm really glad with how this turned out. It adds a nice hut to my building repertoire of terrain. But yeah, make sure to let me know what you think in the comments. If you're interested in checking out other things that I've got going on, I do have an Instagram account where I post pictures of work in progress and maybe other projects that I'm not necessarily doing videos on. And then if you're interested in purchasing any terrain for yourself or maybe a friend, I do have an Etsy shop where you can find dungeon tiles and accessories to go along with those. Both of those you could find links for in the description below. But as always, more than anything, thank you for stopping by. I hope to see you next time.